Hello, my name is Visgluigers and welcome to Armored Warfare and to the M60A2 aka the Starship tank review. And we'll be taking a look at the Tier 4 American main battle tank, which is quite different from the other Tier 4 main battle tanks, but at the same time being very similar to the previous American main battle tanks. Now, as usual, on the left side we'll be having the raw statistics, unmodified stats that will be on your tank when you fully research everything on the vehicle, without counting the commander bonuses, the crew bonuses or the retrofit bonuses. So the statistics in here will lie just a little bit, so you need to kinda trust these unless you're going for the exactly same output. Then you can pretty much check these. Let's start up with the HP. The HP is 1345, which is fairly good, just being a little bit behind the OF40, which has 1375. Now the T64 is quite drastically behind with only 1220 hit points. So that is something that you will kind of feel. You can take a hit or two more in the Starship that you couldn't take on the T64. And speaking of taking hits, what is the armor like? And it is pretty interesting actually indeed. Now, the turret front is very well protected, as you can see, 292 millimeters of armor, but I am not entirely sure where is that exactly, because this is the most obvious weak spot I have ever seen. If you don't count this machine gun port hatch, whatever it is, if you don't count that, then the turret is almost impervious. In exception of this, I don't know, is it even a turret ring? It probably isn't, but this place can be penetrated. But the cheeks are so heavily angled, they will pretty much bounce. This thing will bounce, the gun mantlet will, it just won't go through the gun mantlet. But this thing, you can penetrate this pretty easily, especially since the tank is not very mobile. Other things you can take advantage of is the lower plate, which is universally bad on all of the M60 variants vehicles. Now the side armor is not too great, only 74 millimeters at the side, as 109 is at the front, not being superbly effective, but it is on a pretty good angle. The lower plate, not so much, and I don't think it's even 100 millimeters. Even if it is, it's quite easily penetrated, which means that the M60A2 will probably wanna be held down most of the time. Now the rear armor is garbage, only 36 millimeters, so you can penetrate it easily with any kind of autocannon, or even HE can penetrate it pretty easily. But I wouldn't rely on firing HE unless you're feeling very tricky and trying to set the engine on fire and so on, all that good stuff. The turret is something that you shouldn't necessarily rely on, because I believe this counts as cage armor, so this can negate a lot of shots. And unless you have like flat on the side, it's still 121 millimeters, so it's always better choice to go for the hull. Now the mobility of the vehicle is probably one of its weakest points. It is by quite far the slowest of all Tier 4 main battle tanks. The max speed is 48.6, which is quite a much slower than its competitors. The T64 having 61.2 and the OF40 does have a nice 59.40. And the acceleration is something that the Starship is also the worst at. Even the T64, which doesn't have a very good acceleration, still has a slivering better than the Starship with 8.5 seconds, which is painfully bad. It feels very sluggish to move and to turn. It's just, no, it feels a bit bad. As the OF40 does feel quite nimble, and the T64, while not being horrendous, the Starship is pretty horrendous. And when we move on to the Vision, it's actually surprisingly good news. It's got the best view range of all Tier 4 main battle tanks. It's got 375 meters of view range unmodified, which is the best, leaving the T64 to the second place with 360 meters. Now 375 meters of view range is quite low, even on Tier 4. For instance, the Zalo S can easily go almost to 500, so having 375 as a base view range is quite bad, and you really can't spot for yourself unless you are in a very close-up engagement. And the camo value is also horrendously bad, 0.045, which pretty much means that whenever you are in a view range of someone, you will be spotted immediately. So yeah, even comparison to the other main battle tanks that does not have too good camouflage values, the Starship is still a lot worse than they are. But when we move on to the firepower, it shows what the Starship is really all about. It's all about this 152mm gun. Now, as the OF40 pretty much worked with its rate of fire and ridiculously good DPM, the Starship is exactly the opposite. It has bad aiming time but huge alpha damage. So you cannot choose to fire nothing else except heat, anti-tank guided missiles, and HE. And really, you really probably shouldn't even load HE unless in very exceptional situations, because it is never going to do as much damage as the heat shells. So I guess they have their use, but 22mm of penetration on average is not going to do anything to main battle tanks and even some light tanks. You know, you really need to shoot HE against like armored fighting vehicles that have next to no armor, and even then you come better off just using heat. So the HE is kinda, if you wanna disrupt a cap or something like that, you could go with HE, but other than that, there's very little use for the HE shells. So the alpha damage with the heat is massive, 534 unmodified, which you can buff with different retrofits and stuff like that, making it far superior than the OF40, with its heat shells having only 368 damage per shot, and the AP has even less, 269. But the T64 is not actually that much far behind. 455 damage per shot is not that bad. So you can, if you have played the T64, it's almost like that, but a little bit even more extreme. But how about the penetration? Well, actually the penetration is also very good. Its heat penetration is 316, which is even better than the penetration on the AP rounds on the OF40. The penetration on the OF40's AP shells isn't that bad. The T64 is quite far behind as well. and with their heat shells they are even more far behind. So the heat shells are really devastating on the Starship. But where it falls flat on its face is the DPM. The DPM is not hugely worse with its heat shells. It's 2520 in comparison to the OF40's 3036 and T64's 3185. So it's like 500 to a little bit more than 600 DPM behind. And you might be thinking, well, that's not that bad. Well, yes and no. Because you see, the rate of fire is so abysmally bad. The rate of fire in the Starship is only 4.72 rounds per minute, which is less than 5 rounds. Now the OF40 has 8.25, T64 7 rounds per minute, which means that they can these two tanks can afford to miss a shot or two, and even then make quite good amount of damage. The Starship, if you miss 2 of your shots, that's like your DPM being halved roughly. So you really cannot miss, and you cannot afford to not penetrate. That's why you need a huge alpha damage, and that's why you need huge penetration. So what is actually quite surprising is that even though it is vastly bigger gun than on the OF40 and the T64, the accuracy is not that bad. If you're coming from World of Tanks and thinking 152mm gun, oh, that's not gonna hit anything. Well, it's actually surprisingly accurate, 0.15 accuracy. That's better than the T64's 0.16 accuracy. The OF40, well, surprisingly enough, is the best at 0.13, but it's kinda classified as a quote-unquote sniper, so it should have quite a lot better accuracy, but it's not that much better than the Starships. Which is very surprising. At least I took it by surprise, and I believe a lot of people take it by surprise. The Starship is not very inaccurate at long ranges if you give it time to aim, and that's the trick. It does have quite big aiming time. The aiming time is 3 whole seconds, but yet again the T64 has even worse aiming time. It's got 3.5 seconds. So even though you're kinda using, well, a lighter gun, the big 152 is a little bit more flexible in that regard, which is absurd to me, but you know, I guess it's balanced by the DPM. The OF40 again shines on top with 2.7 seconds of aiming time, which is only 0.3 seconds better than the Starships. So the Starship is actually quite accurate, and it doesn't take that long to aim. So it pretty much comes to your positioning and just pure nerve keeping and focus. Because then you can quite easily, if you know your targets and you know when to shoot and where to shoot, you can quite reliably put out that DPM. But if you do miss, that's gonna sting. Now the absurd news just keep pouring in. The turret traverse, you would think that this huge turret would be slow to turn. Look at the size difference, the T64, the Starship, the OF40, the Starship. The Starship has by far the fastest turning turret of Tier 4 main battle tanks. The OF40 has just a little bit under 20. The T64 has 18.1, which is not very good at all. And the Starship has 32.2 degrees per second traverse rate, which is very good on a main battle tank. And you'd think that it would be very slow because the tank itself is so slow, but no, it is surprisingly fast. And the gun depression is also very good. 10 degrees at the front, but only 2 degrees at the rear. So yeah, it's not great on the rear, but really the OF40 has only 1, and the T64, well, actually it's got 5 degrees. So the T64 is best at the gun depression, but honestly, and that can actually be a problem for you. Only 2 degrees with relatively big tank. If you have a Sheridan or some other smaller vehicle, well, actually the Sheridan is surprisingly big, but let's say you have a T64 right behind you and you're tracked. You cannot turn your vehicle. It is actually very, very, very hard to turn your gun down at the backside, but at the front it's no problem. 10 degrees at the front is really good. But I think that's enough about the statistics. Next we're gonna have some gameplay of the Starship, and then we're gonna have some post thoughts about how I personally found the Starship and how you probably should use it and how it acts in different kind of situations, what I found to be extremely good or surprising, and what I found surprisingly bad and annoying. Okay, and here we have our PvE game. So this map is pretty good for the Starship. It's not that big and it's a city map. So there's not a lot of distance that we have to go through in order to engage the enemies. Because as you will see straight away, that the tank is very, very slow. It doesn't accelerate well and it doesn't turn well, and its top speed is quite bad, even for a main battle tank. We're going on a slight downhill at 40, 41, maximum 42 kilometers per hour, which is quite slow. And now I'm trying to get a bit up behind this rock, and it just takes so long. It's so sluggish and so on. And here we have the biggest weakness that really bugged me about this tank. You cannot ever one-shot anything in Armored Warfare unless you set the engine on fire or make an ammo rack. Those are the 2 exceptions, and they're pretty rare. Now you do set sometimes the engines on fire, but it's quite rare. And you can bolster your chances of doing that by, learning where the engine is and so on. Some skills and perks can affect that, the munition affects that, but in general it's a roll of a dice, and it still happens very rarely. Now in PvP it's not that much of a problem, because you will never one-shot anyone, because your alpha damage is just not high enough. But in PvE it's very frustrating. You have a target which has 350 HP and your alpha damage is like way above 350, but you have to put 2 shots into him. Now you can kind of go around that if you drop the enemy in low enough HP to just ram him, but that's quite rare. For instance, this guy, 315 damage. That's quite low. It's really low. But nothing you can do about it, it's just in the game. And another thing that is in the game that I cannot hit this expeditionary tank. I shoot just in case, but no, even though it was supposed to be pretty much a hit, there were that, building construction thingy, and it hit that, didn't go through. But here we see the accuracy and the turning rate of the turret. Even though when we get surprised, the turret does rotate reasonably fast, but the hull doesn't. And even in this situation, it is really frustrating. If that Leopard 2 AV would have been a player, we would have been stuffed. But since it was a bot, well, we're pretty much good to go. And the thing about the Starship is you really want to have engagements pretty much like this, so that you can kill your enemies one by one and just, you know, don't ever engage more than one target at the time. You know, there are bots everywhere, but bots are bots. But only this Leopard is pretty much interested in killing us, so we can quite easily trade, even though, you know, the Leopard didn't shoot at us. But if that would have been a player, we could have easily traded shots, and the Starship would always come on top. Now, obviously, you really do want to hunt down all softly armored targets, like armored fighting vehicles and light tanks. Main battle tanks, at least frontally, do give you a lot of trouble. But the thing about lightly armored vehicles is that they are really fast. And even though this gun is reasonably accurate, it's very unpleasant if you're trying to shoot at a moving target.
Good work. You've gone above and beyond, and I'll make sure
now,
you're rewarded for it.
This match is actually quite short, but I feel like you can get pretty good feel of the tank. Now, I don't know what this Chieftain Mark 5 is doing, but hey, maybe he's a new player, who knows. But you really, in these kind of situations, can see that the Starship struggles. If you cannot have the enemies directly at your front, it's slow, you don't kind of know where to turn, and even though the enemies are at the front, they will penetrate you very, quite easily. Now we do cap this out, and the game ends here. I think this game surprisingly well demonstrates the Starship. It's very sluggish. It's not immobile. It's not the KV-2 of World of Tanks. Immobile, you can move in it. But in Armored Warfare, all the main battle tanks that are supposed to be slow, or like most of the main battle tanks in Armored Warfare, which, are the slowest vehicles of the game, are still surprisingly mobile. At least if you compare it to World of Tanks. The main battle tanks are more like medium tank kind of mobility. And the Starship does resemble a lot of the more like heavy tank instead of an main battle tank feel. It is sluggish and slow, and its reload is just a bit unbearably long. And it really bugs you, especially when in PvE, because you quite rarely actually do your full potential damage. Because there's a lot of light tanks and armored fighting vehicles that do have quite low amount of hit points. Of course, if you are engaging a vehicle that has like 1,000 or more hit points, it's not that big of a problem. But it always bugs you when you have a huge alpha damage and then only make 250 damage or 350 damage, even though you would have even though you kind of should do a way more damage than that. But it's just the limitations of the game, which I kind of find personally interesting and not necessarily something that the game should have. I understand in PvP that the devs don't want people to be one-shotted, and that's reasonable in my experience. But in PvE, you, I think, should be able to one-shot people, especially since the ammo racks are also in the game, meaning that you can like two-shot, one-shot, or two-shot, or I don't know, maybe even one-shot a person by detonating their ammo rack. So yeah, But my personal opinion about the Starship is kind of mixed bag. Wasn't like a chore to grind it through. When I played the previous tanks, they were like, I didn't like them at all. I mean, like, not like, pretty much not at all. And the Starship was a lot better. It wasn't it didn't gain any mobility, and the armor is like kinda, the hull is bad, but the turret is surprisingly good, in exception of the, you know, ridiculously big tumor on top of it. But the gun, at least when it works and it's glorious. But it's just not quite good. In PvE, it was at times even fun tank to drive. Regularly it was like, you know, meh, quite in the middle ground, not good, not horrible, it's okay. But in PvP, I really did not enjoy the Starship. And that is why I don't have any PvP footage of the Starship, because I just did not enjoy it at all. People know where to shoot you. People know how to track you. People know where your weak spots are. So your armor, while in paper it's pretty good, on practice it's garbage. People know how to counter you with very little trouble. So it ended up being a tank which was slow, which had a reasonably good gun, but if you miss, you're stuffed. And when you get spotted, which is something that is not very hard to do, you're stuffed. Because you're so slow and people know where to shoot you. And the weaknesses are very glaring. In PvE, the bots are quite stupid, so it's not that big of a problem. But in PvP, if you get a 101, you can make that work with a little bit of a luck. But if you're playing against a platoon or something like that, even just a little bit of a coordination from the enemy, you're a gunner, and that's that. And the thing that really annoyed me about this tank, especially in the PvP, because, you know, people know where to shoot, is that almost every single tank, especially the main battle tanks, if you get them hull down, you are in an excellent position and it's very hard to dig you out. Not so much in the Starship, because the Starship has this so big machine gun port on top, and that's the first thing that people will see when you're driving up a hill or a ridge. People can easily shoot that and pull back. It's just, you are no ridge-line warrior, or you kinda need to be, but it doesn't work. Or you need an RNG so that, you know, the enemies won't hit your machine gun port like straight on. And that's just, you know, I don't like tanks that heavily rely on RNG, or to the fact that, you know, your enemy might be new to the game and might not know any better where to shoot or what to do. No. This tank is quite newbie kicker. Against new players, it might be fairly effective, but against experienced players, or even players who have like moderate experience, it's very hard to play a good game in the Starship. And that's what really kills it for me, because I don't feel like yes, I really outplayed this person, or yes, I made now really good moves, or whatever. It's always like, yeah, well, it's because he didn't know any better, or he just got scared. Oh, what is that? Big tank, shoot it once, it bounced, and you know, they panic. Then they don't know what to do. But if it's an experienced player, even if they bounce, or probably won't bounce, but even if they would bounce, they know that, oh, it's got a really bad mobility, it's got a really bad reload time, and so on and so on. They can exploit all of that, and you just die. If you have a platoon, if you're playing this tank in a platoon, that will probably help a lot. But it still doesn't fix the fact that you are really slow and will struggle heavily to keep up with, you know, all the other tanks. You maybe, if you have a buddy in a T64, that could probably work out. But yeah, it's hard tank to play really well. It's good. It's a tank that you can do easily okay, but it's hard tank to do really well because its DPM isn't that great, and it has quite a lot of flaws, but it doesn't have any key strengths. Its armor is pretty bad for a main battle tank. Its gun is nothing super special, because in my opinion the T64 pretty much has a better gun, and its vision, while being best in the main battle tanks, is not telling a lot. Its camo is the worst, and its HP is quite comparable to the other main battle tanks. So there's no really strong points of the vehicle. So all in all, I didn't hate it, I didn't like it, it was quite neutral. The tank had its moments, but in the end, it wasn't enough to keep me interested into the vehicle. I still have it in my garage, but it's pretty much there only to be a trophy that I grinded it through, and I will probably not look at it in a very long time again. So thank you so much for watching this review. I hope you have enjoyed it, and hopefully I'll see you in the next video.